History remembers names, but legends they echo. Among the ruins of ancient Alexandria, beyond the scrolls of philosophers and whispers of scandal, rises the name of one woman who defied the expectations of her world and ours, Cleopatra VII. A name so charged with myth, desire, brilliance, and betrayal that even today we struggle to separate the woman from the symbol. Some call her a temptress, others a political genius. She has been immortalized by Shakespeare, painted by artists like Jean-Léon Gérôme, and played by Elizabeth Taylor in Hollywood's golden age. But who was she really? Was she truly beautiful, or just dangerously intelligent? Was she a pawn of Caesar and Antony, or the hand that moved the pieces? This is not the story of a woman who conquered the world by accident. This is the story of a queen who studied the world, understood it, and then bent it to her will. Today we peel back the layers of legend. We return to the dusty scrolls, minted coins, Roman gossip, and Egyptian stone to rediscover the woman behind the myth. The last pharaoh of Egypt, the lover of empires, the mind behind the crown. This is the story of Cleopatra. Before she became a queen, before she was the talk of Rome, Cleopatra was a child of legacy and peril. Born in 69 BC into the opulent yet blood-stained halls of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra VII was never meant to be ordinary. Her family had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, descendants of Ptolemy the Soter, a general of Alexander the Great, but their reign was infamous for another legacy: betrayal. In the palaces of Alexandria, ambition ran thicker than blood. Cleopatra's ancestors married their siblings, murdered their rivals, even their own kin, just to sit on the throne one more day. Her childhood was painted with golden ceilings and crimson consequences. Yet from the beginning, Cleopatra was different. Where others ruled by inheritance, she would rule by intelligence. She was raised in a palace of over 100 rooms, echoing gardens, mosaic floors, bronze statues, libraries, and fountains fed by aqueducts. Alexandria was not just a capital, it was the intellectual heart of the Mediterranean. While other royals bathed in luxury, Cleopatra bathed in language. She mastered 7, possibly 8 tongues: Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Aramaic, and possibly even Persian or Hebrew. Unlike her predecessors, she spoke to her people in their own language. She didn't need an interpreter, she was one. Her education was rigorous. She read Homer, debated philosophy, studied geometry, and trained in the art of rhetoric. Oratory wasn't just a subject, it was a weapon, and she wielded it with grace. Poised stance, precise gestures, and a voice like silk hiding steel. This was not the education of a mere figurehead. This was the training of a ruler who intended not just to survive, but to command. In a dynasty where beauty faded and power was borrowed, Cleopatra crafted something far more dangerous: influence. At just 17 years old, Cleopatra ascended to the throne of Egypt. Not alone, but alongside her 13-year-old brother, Ptolemy III. It was tradition, yes, but it was also a time bomb. In theory, they were to rule together. In reality, Egypt could not tolerate 2 crowns. Cleopatra, with her education, oratory, and sharp political instincts, began taking a prominent role in court. She met foreign diplomats, made independent decisions, even placed her face on coins, an act not just of vanity, but of authority. That didn't sit well with the king's advisors. 3 men, Pothinus, Achillas, and Theodotus of Chios, pulled the young Ptolemy closer, whispering the same toxic lullaby heard in many palaces: "You don't need her." By 49 BC, Cleopatra was forced out of Alexandria. Her face disappeared from coins. Her name was stripped from royal proclamations. She fled to Syria. But Cleopatra was not the type to fade into the desert. There in exile, she raised an army, one loyal not to a name but to her voice. Meanwhile, across the sea, Rome was on fire. Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great were locked in civil war. And fate, hungry for drama, brought that war straight to Egyptian shores. Pompey, once a friend to Cleopatra's father, fled to Egypt after his defeat in Greece. He expected sanctuary. Instead, he found betrayal. Theodotus and the council, afraid of angering Caesar, welcomed Pompey with a dagger. He was stabbed and decapitated before he could even disembark. When Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria days later, they offered him Pompey's severed head. They expected thanks. They got silence and then fury. For all Caesar's ruthlessness, he respected greatness, and Pompey had once been great. Caesar ordered the execution of the advisors responsible. Now the queen in exile had her chance. But how do you re-enter a palace where your enemies rule every hall? With silk, with smoke, and with strategy. In a move now etched into legend, Cleopatra had herself smuggled back into the palace, rolled inside a linen carpet, or possibly a hemp sack, carried by her loyal servant Apollodorus. By the time the carpet was unrolled, Julius Caesar had found something more captivating than vengeance, an equal. Thus began one of history's most powerful partnerships, and most dangerous love stories. What began with silk and strategy became something far more powerful. Julius Caesar had not just found a queen. He had found a partner. In Cleopatra, he saw not only beauty and ambition, but intellect and command. She wasn't a figurehead, she was a force. Their alliance shocked the ancient world. Two legends from two ancient civilizations woven together by war, vision, and something more. Soon, Caesar helped Cleopatra defeat her brother Ptolemy XIII in the Battle of the Nile. The young king drowned while fleeing the battlefield. Cleopatra returned to the throne, this time as sovereign ruler of Egypt. But her return wasn't just political. She and Caesar became lovers. Their union produced a son, Ptolemy XV Philopator Philometor Caesar, better known as Caesarion or Little Caesar. For Rome, this was scandalous. Caesar was married. Cleopatra was foreign, and yet he invited her to Rome. In 46 BC, Cleopatra arrived in the Eternal City with Caesarion and an entourage fit for a pharaoh. She lived openly in one of Caesar's private villas, lavish, exotic, controversial. The Roman elite were furious. They whispered rumors, wrote verses mocking her, painted her as a sorceress, a temptress, an enemy. But to Caesar, she was a queen of his equal. He even dedicated a golden statue of her in the temple of Venus Genetrix, honoring her as semi-divine. This wasn't just diplomacy, this was legacy building. Behind closed doors, Cleopatra watched Caesar reshape Rome into a dictatorship. And Caesar, in turn, watched Cleopatra rule Alexandria with elegance and precision. For a brief flickering moment, two rulers, two cities, two worlds stood side by side. But empires are not built on love stories alone. In 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated by senators who feared his growing power. Cleopatra, now a foreign queen in a hostile city, quietly slipped away and returned to Egypt with her son. Her partner was gone, but her purpose was not. She would survive, and she would rise again. Rome had buried Caesar, but Cleopatra was not done with Rome. In the wake of Caesar's assassination, the empire splintered. Riots shook the forum. Streets whispered the names of revenge. In this power vacuum rose two men, Octavian, the calculating heir of Caesar, and Mark Antony, his charismatic general and loyal right hand. At first, the two were allies. Along with Lepidus, they formed the Second Triumvirate, a brittle, three-headed beast dividing the Roman world. But power doesn't like to be shared. In 41 BC, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in the city of Tarsus. What followed was not a political meeting, it was theater. Cleopatra didn't arrive like a diplomat. She arrived like a goddess. Her ship had a golden stern, silver oars, purple sails, and music playing from lyres and flutes. She lay beneath a canopy of gold, perfumed, attended by servants dressed as cupids. The city stopped to watch, and Mark Antony watched too, spellbound. Their chemistry was immediate, but more than romance, it was recognition. He saw in her a sovereign, not a consort. She saw in him a warrior, not a pawn. Soon he followed her to Alexandria. There the two ruled not just over politics, but over myth. Lavish banquets, bold declarations. The world watched as two powers became one. In 40 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to twins, Helios and Selene. Mark Antony would later officially recognize them, and their third child, Ptolemy Philadelphus. But across the sea, Octavian grew restless. He arranged for Antony to marry his sister Octavia in a bid to bind him to Rome. It worked, briefly, but Antony couldn't forget Cleopatra. And Cleopatra wasn't one to be forgotten. They reunited in Antioch, now openly ruling as a couple. Cleopatra was declared Queen of Kings. Their children were given eastern territories, and Rome was divided. Octavian was furious. Cleopatra to him represented not just a rival but a threat to Roman unity. What had started as romance was now prelude to war. The world had split in two. On one side, Octavian, cold, calculating, heir to Caesar, and the future Augustus. On the other, Cleopatra and Mark Antony, two rulers in love, two civilizations united against Rome's future emperor. The tipping point came in 31 BC at the Battle of Actium, a massive naval confrontation off the coast of Greece, with Antony and Cleopatra commanding one of the largest fleets ever assembled in antiquity. But power is fragile, and trust even more so. Facing Octavian's forces, Antony's strategy unraveled. Cleopatra, fearing capture, retreated with her fleet mid-battle. Antony followed her, abandoning the fight. The Roman navy cheered, and Octavian had his victory. Back in Egypt, Cleopatra proclaimed a false triumph. But the world already knew the truth. Their power crumbled, allies vanished, cities turned. Rumors of betrayal spread like wildfire. Still, Cleopatra refused to surrender. She explored new alliances, fortified her court, prepared poisons just in case. But Antony was breaking. When he was falsely told that Cleopatra had taken her own life, Antony plunged a sword into his chest. But he didn't die quickly. Carried to her by servants, he died in Cleopatra's arms, in her palace with her kiss. When Octavian finally marched into Alexandria, he found not a queen on her knees, but a woman cloaked in silence. She negotiated to spare her children. She refused to be paraded through Rome as a trophy. And then, with quiet resolve, Cleopatra took her fate into her own hands. We may never know the exact method, whether serpent or poison, but we know this. The queen died on her terms. 9 days after Antony, buried beside him as she had requested. With her death, Egypt fell, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended, and Rome became an empire. But Cleopatra never truly vanished. In scroll and sculpture, in poetry and film, in memory and myth, she became something greater than a queen. She became eternal. She was not just the last pharaoh of Egypt, she was the last to fight for its soul. Through war, love, loss, and legacy, Cleopatra defied the world around her. Not with brute strength, but with language, intellect, and unyielding will. She has been called a lover, a seductress, a queen. But above all, she was a strategist who dared to stand equal with the emperors of history. And though her empire fell, her story never did.